It was one of the proudest moments of my career. I had been working with the Chamber of Commerce for years, and tonight, I was being honored with an award that celebrated my contributions to the business community. It was a black tie event, expensive suits, floor-length gowns, and enough champagne to make even the surest person talkative. My wife, Jessica, sat next to me, dressed in a stunning green dress, her smile as radiant as ever. Or so I thought. As the night moved along and the ceremony inched closer, I was rehearsing my speech in my head. I glanced over at Jessica to share a smile, but she was busy scrolling on her phone, looking slightly irritated. Odd, but I brushed it off. A few minutes before my name was announced, she leaned in close to me, and for a second, I thought she was going to whisper some words of encouragement. Instead, she dropped a bombshell. "I'm going to Vegas this weekend with your business partner, Steve," she whispered, her voice smooth, almost too casual. My heart stopped. I froze in my chair, staring at her. Was she joking? Was this some twisted attempt at humor? "Excuse me?" I managed to whisper back, my voice shaking more than I'd like to admit. The crowd buzzed around us, and I was acutely aware that this wasn't the place to lose it. "Vegas? Me? Steve? This weekend?" she repeated as if she was simply reminding me to pick up milk on the way home. Her eyes flickered to Steve, who was sitting across from us, his eyes locked on her. He had that self-satisfied grin on his face, like a man who knew he'd already won. I felt a cold wave wash over me. "Jessica, what the hell are you talking about? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," she said. "I've already packed." My mind raced, trying to process what she just said. I was seconds away from walking up to the stage to receive a career-defining award, and here Jessica was, casually telling me she was leaving for Vegas with Steve, my business partner of nearly a decade, my best friend, the guy I'd built my business with from the ground up. "What the hell are you thinking, Jess?" I whispered, my voice trembling with the effort of keeping calm. "Why would you do this to me? Now, of all times?" Her eyes barely flickered as she looked back at me, her expression cool and indifferent. "It's not about the timing, Michael. It's about me needing something different. Something exciting." "Steve? You're going with Steve?" I hissed, struggling to keep my tone low as people around us chattered and laughed. The last thing I needed was to cause a scene at the event, but the fury inside me was boiling over. I wanted to stand up and shout at her, shake her, anything to break through the smug calm she radiated. She leaned back in her chair, completely unfazed by the disgust and anger flooding my expression. "Look, we've been together for 10 years, and I need more. And Steve, well, Steve knows how to make me feel alive. It just happened. The thrill, the sex, everything. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. The word sex hit me like a gut punch, twisting the knife even deeper. This wasn't just some harmless flirtation. She was sleeping with him. My wife. In Vegas. For the entire weekend. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to maintain a facade of calm while my entire world unraveled. "How long has this been going on?" I asked through gritted teeth. She sighed, as if she was tired of explaining herself to me. "A few months. We didn't plan for it to get this far, but you know how these things go." "No, I don't," I snapped, my voice low but dangerous. "I don't know how these things go because I'm not a goddamn cheater." For the first time, her cool expression faltered. She turned to look at me, but her eyes held no remorse, only a cold kind of resolve. "Look, I'm sorry, but it's happening. I'm leaving with him after the ceremony. We'll be back on Monday, and then maybe we can talk." I wanted to shout at her, to tell her how sick and twisted this was, but then I heard the master of ceremonies call my name. It was time to accept my award. Without saying another word, I stood up, my body feeling like lead, and walked to the stage. The applause and cheers from the crowd were a dull roar in my ears. All I could think about was Jessica and Steve, sitting back there, planning their little Vegas getaway while I stood up here, being celebrated as if my life was still intact. I shook the hand of the presenter and accepted the award. As I stepped up to the microphone, the room seemed to blur for a moment. I had written a whole section in my speech thanking Jessica for her support over the years, but there was no way in hell I was going to say any of that now. So, I skipped it. I made the rest of my speech short and to the point, thanking the Chamber of Commerce for the honor and the community for their support. I forced a smile as the crowd clapped again, but inside, I was unraveling. When I sat back down, Jessica didn't even acknowledge my speech. Instead, she was texting on her phone, probably Steve. "What? I don't even get a mention," she said, sarcasm dripping from her voice as she sipped her champagne. I glared at her. "You don't deserve one." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Like I said, we'll talk Monday." As I sat back down, I couldn't stop myself from glancing at Steve. He was still across the table, leaning back in his chair with that arrogant smile, like he'd won the lottery. His wife, Christine, sat beside him, staring down at her drink, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Clearly, she knew what was going on, and she wasn't thrilled about it either. I wanted to punch him. Right there, in the middle of the banquet hall, I wanted to put my fist through his smug face. But I held back. Barely. The humiliation was too raw, the betrayal too fresh, and the audience too big. "Don't even think about it," Jessica warned in a low voice, noticing the direction of my gaze. "You're not making a scene here." "I'm not going to make a scene," I said through gritted teeth, though the temptation was strong. "But if you go through with this, Jessica, don't bother coming home. This is your last chance. If you leave with him, we're done." Her face didn't even twitch. "We'll see about that," she said coolly. "But I'll be back on Monday. Maybe by then you'll have calmed down enough to actually talk." I slid off my wedding ring and placed it on the table in front of her. "I mean it. Do not come home if you go through with this." She picked up the ring, looked at it for a second, then dropped it into her purse without a word. Steve stood up to make his speech next. On his way to the podium, he made a point of brushing past me, just close enough for me to feel the heat radiating off him. "No hard feelings, Mike," he said quietly, leaning in just enough for me to hear. "I'll try not to wear her out too much." That did it. My vision blurred with rage, and it took every ounce of self-control not to leap at him. Instead, I grabbed my glass, downed the rest of my whiskey, and let him walk to the stage. As he started speaking, I leaned over to Jessica one last time. "If you go through with this, I swear you'll regret it. I'll make sure you do." She smirked, still as unfazed as ever. "Oh, Michael, you always were too dramatic." When Steve finished his speech, the ceremony started winding down. People were mingling, congratulating me, and I had to fake my way through the small talk while Jessica stood next to me, already halfway out the door in her mind. Steve and Christine were across the room, talking to another couple, but I could see Steve glancing over at us every few seconds. He was enjoying this, savoring the drama. Finally, the event ended, and the crowd began to thin out. As I grabbed my coat, I gave Jessica one last chance. "You do not have to do this," I said, my voice low but firm. "We can go home, talk this out, and fix things." But she was already gone. "I told you, we'll talk when I get back," she said, her voice cold. "Maybe by then, you'll be ready to hear me out." Steve walked over, smirking like the arrogant bastard he was. "Ready, Jess?" She nodded and turned to me with that same infuriating smirk. "See you on Monday, Michael." And just like that, they left together. I stood there, watching them walk out the door, Jessica's arm casually looped through Steve's. It felt like I had just been sucker punched. Everything around me was moving, people talking and laughing, but I was completely numb. My wife, the woman I had built my life with for the past 10 years, had just walked out on me, with my business partner, and she did it like it was nothing. As soon as they were out of sight, I felt the weight of everything crashing down on me. I looked around the room, trying to compose myself, when I noticed Christine, Steve's wife, sitting alone at the table, staring blankly into her drink. Her eyes were red, and it was clear she had been crying. I walked over to her, unsure of what to say. "Christine, do you need a ride home?" She shook her head, not looking up. "No, I called an Uber. But thank you." We sat there in silence for a minute, the reality of what had just happened hanging between us like a thick fog. Finally, she broke the silence. "Did you know about it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I had no idea. Not until tonight." She wiped her eyes and let out a bitter laugh. Figures. Steve always was a sneaky bastard. I nodded, feeling a wave of sympathy for her. She was in just as much pain as I was, maybe even more. Steve had not only betrayed me, but he had shattered her life as well. Christine, for what it's worth, nothing ever happened between us. Whatever Jessica thinks she saw, it wasn't true. She nodded, wiping her tears again. I know. I tried telling her that too, but once she gets an idea in her head, she trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. Yeah, I said, bitterness creeping into my voice. That's Jessica for you. Always jumping to conclusions, never listening to reason. Christine looked up at me, her eyes filled with sadness. What are you going to do now? I paused, the question hanging in the air. What was I going to do now? My life had just been turned upside down. But one thing was clear. I was done with Jessica and Steve. There was no coming back from this. I'm going to do what needs to be done, I said, my voice steady. And you? Christine wiped her face and straightened up. I told Steve if he did this, I was filing for divorce. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. This isn't the first time he's cheated on me, but it sure as hell will be the last. I nodded, feeling a surge of respect for her. Good for you, Christine. If you need any help, I know a good lawyer. She gave me a weak smile. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. As she stood up to leave, I couldn't help but feel a strange connection with her. Two people bound by the same betrayal, trying to make sense of the wreckage left behind. We had both been blindsided by the people we loved, and now we were left to pick up the pieces. I watched as she walked out of the banquet hall, disappearing into the night. And then, I followed suit. There was no reason to stay any longer. My award, the one I had been so excited about just a few hours ago, felt meaningless now. When I got home, the house felt like a tomb. Everything seemed too quiet, too still. I sat down on the couch and just stared at the wall, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. My mind kept replaying Jessica's words over and over. Vegas, Steve, sex. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I didn't know how long I sat there before I finally decided to make a move. There was a lot that needed to be done, and I wasn't about to let Jessica waltz back into my life after this. I wasn't going to wait for Monday to talk. The first call I made was to Jim Simpson, my lawyer. He had been my attorney for years and knew my business inside and out. He picked up after a couple of rings, his voice warm and familiar. Hey, Michael. Congrats on the award. I thought you'd be out celebrating with Jessica tonight. Yeah, about that, I said, my voice tight. We need to talk, Jim. It's bad. I filled him in on everything. Jessica's affair, her plans with Steve, the whole Vegas disaster. By the time I was done, Jim was silent for a moment, probably processing what I had just told him. Damn, Michael, he finally said. I'm really sorry to hear that. What do you want to do? I want to file for divorce, I said, not hesitating. She's committed adultery, and it's outlined in our prenup. I want to dissolve the marriage based on that. All right, Jim said, his voice professional and focused now. I'll get started on the paperwork. We'll also need to discuss dissolving the business partnership with Steve. I've thought about that too, I said, already a step ahead. We had a clause in our partnership agreement about morally questionable behavior that could damage the business. I want him out. Jim paused, considering this. You'll need to buy him out, Michael. That could get tricky, especially if he fights it. I know, I said, my voice grim, but I want him gone. Whatever it takes. All right, Jim said. I'll start working on everything. Just sit tight, and we'll get this handled. It'll take some time, but we'll make sure you come out of this with as little damage as possible. Thanks, Jim, I said, feeling a small sense of relief. I appreciate it. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in. I had just set the wheels in motion to dismantle my entire life, the marriage, the business, everything. But it was the only way forward. There was no turning back now. The rest of the weekend was a blur. I tried to distract myself, but every time I closed my eyes, I could see Jessica and Steve together, laughing, enjoying themselves in Vegas while I sat alone in our home, trying to pick up the pieces. On Saturday morning, I went to the bank and took care of all the financial matters Jim had advised me to handle. I paid off Jessica's credit cards and then canceled them. I didn't want her racking up any more debt on my dime while she was off with Steve. The house was mine, purchased before we were married and protected by the prenup, so I wasn't worried about that. But I couldn't stand the idea of Jessica coming back on Monday and acting like everything was normal. So I called a locksmith and had all the locks changed. I wanted her to know she wasn't welcome anymore, not after what she had done. Throughout the weekend, I received several voicemails from Jessica. Each one was worse than the last. "Oh, Michael," she moaned in one of them, her voice low and breathy. "Steve feels so good inside me right now. I cannot stop thinking about how much better he is than you. Maybe when I get back, I will tell you all about it in detail. Or maybe I'll let you watch next time." I gritted my teeth as I listened, feeling sick to my stomach. She was doing this on purpose, trying to hurt me, trying to provoke a reaction. But I would not give her the satisfaction. I forwarded the messages to Jim, along with a note, proof of adultery. Then, I sent them to Christine. She needed all the help she could get in her own divorce from Steve. By Sunday night, the house was a ghost town. I had packed up all of Jessica's clothes and personal items, stuffed them into garbage bags, and thrown them into her car, which I had parked in the driveway. I did not want a single reminder of her left inside. I even took down our wedding photo that hung above the fireplace and smashed it into pieces before tossing it into the trash. It was over. Monday evening came faster than I expected. I had spent the entire weekend preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, the tension gnawed at me. I sat on the couch, listening for the sound of her car in the driveway. Part of me hoped she would come home in tears, full of regret. Another part of me wanted her to stay gone for good. The doorbell rang, sharp and loud. I ignored it at first. Then it rang again, followed by a series of frantic knocks. I stood up, taking my time, and finally walked to the door. As I opened it, there she was, Jessica, standing on the porch, looking flustered and confused. "Michael," she said, her voice high-pitched with irritation. "Why the hell don't my keys work?" I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. I had the locks changed. Her mouth dropped open, eyes wide. "You did what?" "Michael, stop being ridiculous. Let me in. We need to talk." I shook my head slowly. "There's nothing to talk about, Jess. You made your choice. You left with Steve." She huffed, rolling her eyes like she could not believe I was actually serious. "Oh, come on. It was just a weekend. We had some fun. Now, let me in so we can figure things out." I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound. "Fun? Is that what you call screwing my business partner for 3 days? Fun?" Jessica's face twisted in anger. "Stop being so dramatic. It was just sex. You should be thanking me for spicing up our dead marriage." My blood ran cold. There it was, her true colors. She had zero remorse. She actually believed she had done me a favor. "Jessica," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "you are not coming back into this house. Not now, not ever. Your stuff is packed in your car. Go find a motel." Her eyes flared with indignation. "Are you out of your goddamn mind? I am your wife." "Not anymore," I shot back. "I filed for divorce this morning." That caught her off guard. Her expression faltered for a second before she straightened up, flipping her hair back like it did not matter. "Divorce? Oh, please, Michael. Do you really think that's going to stick? You have nothing on me." I smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "Actually, I have plenty on you. Every filthy voicemail you left me over the weekend. Every disgusting thing you said about what you and Steve did. Yeah, I saved it all. Sent it straight to my lawyer." Jessica's face went pale, her bravado slipping away. "You what?" "You heard me," I said, stepping closer, letting her feel the full weight of my words. "I have proof of everything. The divorce is going to be ugly, Jess, and you're going to walk away with nothing. All those years, all that effort I put into this marriage, you just threw it away for a quick thrill." She stood there, blinking rapidly, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. It felt good. It felt damn good. "Now," I continued, "you can either leave quietly, or I'll call the cops to remove you. Your choice." Jessica swallowed hard. her face a mixture of shock and anger. But she was not ready to back down yet. "You want to know why I did it?" she sneered. "Because you're boring, Michael. You're pathetic. You think being a good husband means paying the bills and being a nice guy? Well, newsflash, nice guys finish last. Steve? He knows how to treat a woman. He makes me feel alive in ways you never could." I stared at her, disgust twisting my stomach. "That's it then. All I was to you was stability? A paycheck? A place to keep your things?" Jessica shrugged, her expression cold and indifferent again. "Pretty much." I clenched my fists, feeling the urge to throw her off the porch, but I stayed calm. "Leave, Jess. You are done here." She smirked, stepping back. "I will. But do not think this is over, Michael. You'll regret this. I promise you that." As Jessica stormed off the porch, I stood there for a moment, watching her get into her car. The adrenaline was still pumping through me, but the cold reality of everything began to sink in. She was gone. That part of my life, the 10 years I spent trying to make things work with her, was over. Just as I was about to turn back inside, headlights swept across the driveway. A car pulled up, and out stepped Steve, the bastard himself. He strolled toward the house, all swagger and confidence, like he was still in control. "Michael," he called out, that arrogant smirk plastered on his face. "Let's talk, buddy." "Buddy?" I spat, walking toward him. "You've got some nerve, showing up here after everything." "Look, man," Steve said, holding up his hands like I was the one being unreasonable. "It was just a weekend. You're blowing this way out of proportion." My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You slept with my wife, Steve. You think this is just going to blow over?" Steve shrugged. "I mean, it's not like we're the first guys this has ever happened to. Hell, you probably would have cheated on her eventually. I just got there first." I saw red. Before I could stop myself, my fist connected with his jaw. Steve staggered back, his hand flying up to his face. His smirk was gone now, replaced by shock and anger. "You son of a bitch," he shouted, lunging at me. We crashed into the side of the house, fists flying, both of us grunting and swearing. I could feel the anger burning through me, every punch I landed fueled by the betrayal and humiliation I had felt for days. Steve fought back, but he was no match. I had years of pent-up frustration and rage, and now it was all spilling out in a brutal fistfight. I slammed him against the porch railing, my knuckles bloody, my chest heaving. "You destroyed everything," I yelled, my voice raw. "You took everything from me." Steve tried to shove me off, but I was not done yet. I landed one more punch, right across his face, and he crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. I stood over him, breathing hard. "You are finished, Steve. I'm taking you to court. The business, the money, it is all gone for you. Get the hell off my property." Steve wiped the blood from his nose and glared up at me. "This is not over, Michael," he spat, his voice thick with hatred. "You think you've won, but I'll make your life hell. You just wait." I stepped back, shaking my head. "Get out, Steve, before I call the cops." Steve staggered to his feet, shooting me one last venomous look before limping back to his car. He slammed the door and peeled out of the driveway, leaving me standing there, my knuckles throbbing, my head spinning from the chaos of the night. As I watched his taillights disappear down the road, I finally allowed myself to breathe. It was over. The worst was behind me, but I knew the fallout was just beginning. Jessica would not go quietly, and neither would Steve. There was still a long fight ahead, both in court and emotionally, but for now, I had made my stand, and I was not backing down. Inside, I sat back on the couch, feeling the weight of the evening press down on me. The house was silent, the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful but now felt empty. I had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Still, as I sat there, nursing my bruised knuckles, I could not help but feel a strange sense of freedom. The ties that had bound me to a life of lies and betrayal were finally cut, and I was ready to start over.